Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix. Boy, I like how that last note just kind of drifts out there on that song. I'm your host, Jenna Lessin, and my guest tonight is Richard Knight, and we've been talking to Richard the last several months, and we've done 1 to 2 hour interviews every other week, or whatever it was, and this is part 6. Amazing. It's the 6th time to get through the story. But I think that's important for everybody to be witnessed, to tell your story, to have people acknowledge who you are, accept you just the way you are. And when we take the time to listen to each other's stories, we find out that everybody has had an incredible journey. Some better, some worse, but all our lives worth living and tales worth telling. So I'm going to bring on Richard right now. His mic is unmuted. And my
Good.
First of all, welcome back, Richard. Good to
Thank
have
you, Janet. Thank you.
So we're getting through the
lovely
month.
Evening.
It's a lovely evening. It's been very cold in Maui at night, but right now it's tolerable. But what I wanted to know, and I know we've done 5 other shows, but after you've been through this witnessing and storytelling, and other people out there that listen to the archives and listen live, and some have commented back, and they really like what you had to say. But putting the ball back in your court, who is Richard Knight? Who are you on all levels?
Well, on all levels. Well,
the human and the eternal being.
Okay.
How
well,
if
you start at the human level, basically, I'm a very spiritual person. My life has been dedicated to spirituality, including the paranormal and the supernatural, all of my life since I've been on Earth for 65 years. In addition to that, my other passions are law enforcement and psychology. And I don't have any degrees in psychology, but I have studied the field for about 20 years, just as a matter of seeing how psychology plays into the mindset of people like serial killers and what instigates people to commit crimes. And that's been a very interesting study over time. I haven't written any papers on it or anything of that nature, but it did also help me as I was a federal law enforcement officer and also as a state probation officer. It helped me a great deal in interacting with individuals with that particular mindset, because their world in compared to ours is quite skewed. It's quite coming at things from an entirely different dimension, one almost could say, because to them, they have the right to take what they want to take, including up to the taking of another life if need be, and this kind of thing. And of course, this is very foreign to me, because this is life itself is sacrosanct on a spiritual level. So therefore, taking it upon yourself to have the right to deprive another person of their very life is, the largest thing, the worst thing you could ever possibly do. And then, of course, from a law enforcement standpoint. Go ahead.
That's a kind of quick question. Do you find that these people were like 100% abused as children? They had a rough life? What do you think? What do you find in common with all these people that end up being, a murderer, per se? Let's say?
Well, a lot of people have been abused or have been in abusive relationships. They felt that they were shortchanged, and they were shortchanged over such a long period of time that I guess you could say they crossed the threshold from regular sanity into a mode of insanity, because their morals and their ethics are completely askewed, and they don't relate to us as regular citizens of society. Instead, they're in their own little world, you could say, and they were driven there sometimes, and then at other times they acted out of purpose, sometimes out of jealousy, sometimes out of revenge, sometimes as being a scorned lover, just all kinds of different things of that nature.
Have you ever worked on a case of the serial killers? I mean, it went from one to the next.
I've studied them, but I haven't really worked on them per se. I haven't had one. I did have one client, I guess probationer, you could say, that actually was at the age of 17 had actually shot and killed somebody. So they were a murderer, but we adjudicated them and basically decided that they would be tried as an adult. And basically they went from our hands approximately 4 months later once they turned 18 and went into the adult state prison system. So they got meted out their sentence to us. Our sentencing only held them up until the age of 18, like I said, was 4 months later from that point in time. And then in turn, the adult sentencing system or judgment system and all that kind of thing sentenced him 25 years to life. So basically that was a young man that threw his whole life away because he decided to pull the trigger on somebody. And I mean, there's been other situations that involved gangs, and gang initiation sometimes requires murder just to get into the gang. That's really sad. And they recruit people on the basis that, we're going to be your family. Your family doesn't care about you. We are now your family, and you have to do everything for us, and we will do everything for you. And in actuality, you're doing everything for the gang, and the gang is not doing anything for you because you're the one sticking your neck out, taking all the risks, so that, in fact, if the authorities come looking, they're going to be coming looking for you, and the gangs know we're going to be found. So lots of people have been left hanging by gangs.
Yeah. Do you find if somebody kills somebody, do they get like a soul attachment?
Say again?
Did you ever see anybody did you ever work on a case where somebody killed somebody, and then the soul that they had, the life they had taken, that soul attaches on the murderer? Have you seen that? Sometimes,
yes. I've seen what you would classify as hauntings, where basically they cannot get that person's face or actions out of their head, and at times they basically have nightmares where they actually see them shooting them over and over and over again. And as the person, bleeds out and falls to the ground or whatever. So, I can't readily say, because, you can never get to another person's mind totally, but I would have to say that, that probably happens at least 10% of the time, if not greater. Because,
I was just wondering, that probably is a more, advanced spiritual person than someone who kills somebody and doesn't think about it at all. You ever find that?
Oh.
Or they just had no response to having to... Tell me about that.
That would be true, or else at least they were emotionally empathic. In other words, they felt guilt and remorse after the fact. Not before the fact, but after the fact. When you see someone that you've shot and they're falling to the ground and they're dying, depending, of course, on how long you stick around, will determine how much time you actually spent in seeing them cross over and so forth. Most, of course, don't stick around. Rather, they have just the impact shot and memory of, having shot that person or whatever. Now, of course, again, it would be up to the persons that is in the process of leaving. As we've discussed before, no one goes home early and no one goes home late. So, that I would hate to think that would be an exit point, that a person would use as a way of going home. But then again, if it serves to deter others, you see what I'm saying, because of the lengthy sentence or even possibly the death sentence that's handed down to the individual that killed them, that's supposed to be a deterrent. Now, of course, over time, the judicial system has learned that no, locking people up for life or even executing them does not serve as a deterrent to murder, unfortunately. It's just that some people just get pushed to the point where they're beyond their limits and they're no longer rational, and they just act out in anger, or they act out in jealousy, or they act out in revenge, thinking that, you wronged so-and-so. In other words, you hurt my mother so bad that you deserve to die. And so they go after him and they kill him. And when they're doing the act, they have absolutely no remorse whatsoever, no regret whatsoever. And then, of course, you've got even a worse situation where, for example, a pair of teenage boys set out and plotted out their parents' murder, okay? And they got guns, and they loaded the guns, and they went up and they shot their parents to death while they were in bed. And again,
that was
they
a
have
case
absolutely
you worked
no. No, that's an instance that I'm referring to that was broadcast in the news that transpired a few years back.
on. Okay.
No, I would not know how to deal with that personally. I mean, yes, I could counsel them, but I would also be aware of the fact that they were beyond reach. Because I'm sorry, when you plot to kill your very own parents, that's going quite a ways. And I don't believe in that particular instance the parents were particularly horrific towards the children. It wasn't like they were beating them down physically or mentally or emotionally abusing them to a large extent. They just decided that it would be neat to see what it was like to kill their parents.
Wow.
And, these are teens we're talking about, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, from there spread out a great many other murders in schools where, again, the shooter just went in and decided they just didn't like school anymore, so they just started randomly killing kids and killing teachers and everybody else. Anybody that came in their sight of fire, they just shot.
So looking at that psychologically, have you ever identified what makes somebody do that? I mean, I know you have things like, what was his name? The guy who killed his wife with the glove thing. That was jealousy, right? So jealousy is a strong action. But I can't imagine what would draw a child to kill his own parents. Or I can't get my head behind the Columbine students that just went in. That was one of the early. Just went in and started killing everybody. I can't. I just wonder if because you were in, the police and detectives, and you have to get behind the mind of a killer. I just wondered if there was some kind of psychological profile that you identified, or you and your people, your coworkers identified, perhaps. Maybe you can predict when someone's going to turn out that way. And like you said to me, because, I was starting to look at sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissistic personality disorders, and, Asperger's, all these little things that are kind of on a scale, and some people just end up hurting other people. And some of it's intentional, and some of it's totally unconscious. And I just wondered, because, that's an interesting profession. I never thought of being a police officer. So you had a different path, and suddenly, maybe.
I've never. I was a military policeman.
Field.
Yeah, I was a military policeman for a short period of time when I was 18, and that was a very short period of time. That was only 6 months. And then, of course, I went back in the Army as a JAG specialist, a General Corps, and basically through them, I was also seeing close and up front cases where, there had been outright murder between service members, and there had been abuse through service members and all of this kind of thing. So that added even further to the spectrum. But I think overall, I would have to say probably the most driving force of it all is control. In other words, the parents are seen as authority figures because the kids, feel like they're totally, completely controlled. The parents tell them where to be, what to do, what to wear, who they can see, when they have to be at school, what they're to study, the whole 9 yards. I mean, the parents are basically portraying themselves as lovingly guiding them on the path through life that they believe what will be in their best interest. And I guess some kids just absolutely snap and absolutely rebel against all kinds of authority. And, of course, the ones that are the closest to them would be their parents. So you could say, in a manner of speaking, they're rebelling against authority. And then, of course, the school shootings would be similar. They're rebelling against the fact they were mandated to go to school, whether they wanted to be there or not. And that, in turn, they would rather be expelled, and sometimes expulsion in and of itself may set off certain triggers that in turn, bring up anger and different issues of their past and maybe relationships of their past and everything else. And so they basically take it out on anybody that's at hand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, in gangs, for In gangs, for example, you have drive-by shootings, and that's an initiation into the gang. In other words, a senior gang member places a loaded weapon in the hands of the initiate, and basically they're sitting in the back seat of the car, and the car's driving down the road, and they roll down the window and just begin to shoot, regardless of who it is. So there is no motive for jealousy. There is no motive for trying to overthrow authority. There's no motive whatsoever of any kind of attachment, because the person they're shooting, they don't even know. Instead, the drive is to be accepted into the gang. So that's even sicker in a way.
If you do this,
yeah, exactly.
If you do this, you can be part of this gang. So you have to do this.
Yeah, we can trust you and we can rely on you.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that these kids that end up shooting their parents, their parents were hitters? Is there, the difference between people that are raised by people that don't hit, as opposed to people that are raised by hitters, including spanking? Is there any correlation? Have you found that?
No, I haven't found that discipline truly has no relevance in reference other than teaching a child firsthand. Which, of course, you see, if you're going to institute discipline, you don't need to institute it very long. You only have to guide a child away from something that is wrong for a couple of years. And if you do it when they're very young, they know that lesson real well, and they will not repeat that lesson. They won't go there again. But if you wait now and you start disciplining when they're in their mid to late teens, that's a whole other story. Because now you're talking about physical aggression upon a person that begins to believe that they themselves are an adult, even though they haven't reached the age to become one.
Right. Oh, I know. I had no boundaries when I was a kid, and then somewhere when I was 12, my mother brought in a babysitter, and I went, "What? I don't need a babysitter. I'm old enough to, take care of myself." So anyway,
sure.
That was back in the 60s. So yeah, so I didn't like that. So, but I just didn't listen to the babysitter. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't go out and kill anybody, but I didn't listen to the babysitter. So I see what you're saying. So
my boundaries were rather stretched out there too, because from a very early age, I had run away at 9 and went to visit my grandparents, and my grandparents lived 500 miles away. And I got on a plane by myself and was, landed at the airport by myself, and in turn managed to get from the airport of Los Angeles all the way to Santa Monica, which is quite a good distance, okay, in search of my grandparents. Yes. So, and my grandparents were very shocked when the priest called them, because I ended up at a church, okay, and the priest called my grandparents and said, well, we've got your grandson down here, and they're going, what? And because, they were thinking that, hello, his parents should be calling us and letting us know that he's traveling so that in turn we could meet him at the airport and all this. We shouldn't be getting a call from a church at midnight saying that, hello, there's a young man here by the name of such and such, and he claims that you're his grandparents. Are you his grandparents? And, they admitted, of course, that they were my grandparents, and, of course, they scolded me all the way back to their home and all this kind of good stuff, and then, of course, called my parents the next day, and my parents, in turn, were in shock as well, my parents being a mother and a stepfather anyway. And, they could not believe or understand how it was I got from Northern California all the way to Southern California and was never checked or apprehended or any kind of authority figure took me aside or anything else.
Pretty amazing when you think about it.
But of course, this was back in the day. This was back in the day, so I had me an attaché case, and I thought I was James Bond because in my attaché case I had a Benjamin pump pellet gun, which a pellet gun, if it's on a pump rotation that's used gas cylinders, all right, is actually equivalent to a .22 pistol once it's pumped a half a dozen times.
Oh, really?
Now, granted, it's only projecting a pellet out of the end of it instead of a bullet, but still, you could put people's eyes out, and of course, if you hit somebody in the face with it, it's going to cut their face or scar them or whatever, or at least, at the very least, leave a fairly serious bruise, depending on how many clothes they're wearing.
So we're still on, who is Richard Knight? So that's
anyway.
That's some of the things you did as a person. Who are you beyond your human form?
Well, as I said at the very beginning of our interviews, I came into this world completely aware that I was a spiritual entity or a spiritual being, and that I was connected directly to God, or the source of all. That connection was never broken. That connection stayed with me throughout the entirety of my life. It has saved my life a great many times, and it gave me a different perspective, because you could say that I looked upon Mother and Father God as being my parents, rather than those who were given the physical title of being so.
Now, did you learn anything different about yourself by going through this for you? Because you had these things that you were telling me all along. What did you learn new about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I learned that first and foremost, of course, at the age of 14, when I was 5, of course, they put the tracking device in my nose. The aliens abducted me. I'm still not real clear which aliens it was. And I thought it was rather strange that, because here we were just talking about psychology and the different perspectives. Well, these aliens were interested in seeing how other people rejected me. So it was like they were doing a Class A study of this given individual that was gifted, exceptionally gifted in a lot of different ways, because naturally, as soon as within a month or so after coming back onto the Catholic boarding school where I was boarded at, I started speaking languages. I was a savant of languages all of a sudden, and I could read, write, and speak fluently 14 different languages. And this made things even worse because, well, it made it better from the aspect being that this library that they put me in to keep me isolated away from the rest of the children were written in many different languages, so I could read and understand the books with no problem. But otherwise, it was still isolation. That's the bottom line of it. There was a tremendous amount of rejection, a tremendous amount of fear, all of this kind of thing. And, of course, when people don't understand something, they automatically become frightened. And the fear also will cause people to do a lot of things, such as harm other people, or attempt to even kill them, for that matter, because they're so frightened that they fear. They want to reach out and kill that other being before that being has a chance to kill them. That's how deep-run fear can become. Okay? So anyway, so I'm saying, well, okay, why me, of all these thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of children that were running around on the face of the earth at the time? And, of course, once I got upon the spaceship, I learned that I was only one of probably 20 or 30, that had been abducted at the same time. Now, whether they were all the same treated as me, that I'll never know. But, of course, this device was supposed to be taken out when I was 17. It wasn't taken out until I had it taken out by nasal surgery at the age of 35. Okay? So, and in addition to that, there was also an etheric tracking device that was placed within my etheric body. So once I had ascertained that the physical one was gone, I still was aware that there was something just not right in my etheric body. And this wasn't confirmed until very, very, very much later in life. Okay? I came upon an enlightened master, someone that is basically what you would call an ascended being incarnate. In other words, they have the ability to transcend their regular consciousness into the consciousness of God, or the overall consciousness of God, you could say, or the overall consciousness of Christ, however you want to look at it. But the key thing was that they are able to reach out and give a much broader perspective of things in a universal sense than we would normally perceive in a human sense, because normally, naturally, we're all caught up in our physical lives, and yes, we do have a spiritual life. And, of course, I, for example, spend anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours in meditation on a daily basis, and I find time to do that. And then I also find times where I wake up in the morning and I'm what you call in an altered state. In other words, my focus has become so spiritual that I am in line with my higher self, and my higher self is more consciously aware of what is going on than my physical self is. So my awareness and my abilities to become aware and expand it out in regards to what's going on in my direct environment is far higher or more perceptive than the normal human being would be. And sometimes I stay that way for 3-4 days at a time. And it's not...
I've had that experience, too, and it's hard to explain that to people.
Yes,
when I'm in that
it's
state,
hard,
I often get information beyond my, my normal state, right? It's like you have access to everything, the Akashic records, the source. Tell us more about that. When you're in that state, what is your level of awareness? Are you aware? So you're here. How can you come in and be human and not so crazy if you have this awareness of everything? Because being a human is kind of boring, right? It's kind of like really low level. So how do you keep your sanity?
Human consciousness is very mundane. Okay, but you divide the self or the human identity into 4 basic parts. You have your ego, which is your personality, or what you would call your trained mind, okay? Because this is the mind that's been subjected to all kinds of conditioning and all kinds of programming and everything of that nature. And it's basically the personality that has emerged that is compromised with this conditioning, okay? Then you have your emotional self, of course, that has a record of all the feelings that you have ever had since you were born, all right? Then you have your mental self. Your mental self has made a record of everything that has occurred from the day one that you were born up until the present day. Now, of course, the mental record basically fades in most people. Mine, if I want to look at a particular event in a particular year, at a particular age, at a particular time, I just zoom right back, or it's like I have an archive of knowledge, and all I do is pull up a slideshow, and I can tell you verbatim exactly what happened as though it happened yesterday. Now, I also have the ability to do that also with several different past lives from different periods in this history as far as mankind has been a civilization throughout history, okay? And then I also have the awareness or this archived knowledge and wisdom that is constantly with me. So you could say all of the wisdom of 100,000 lives or maybe 1,000 lives. I'm not sure exactly how many the number is because I don't know that for an absolute certainty, because if I knew that for an absolute certainty, then I would cease to be human at all, because my spirit consciousness would come down into my physical consciousness and my physical self, and basically I would become very much Christ-like, if not beyond, because Christ became aware or God-like at the age of 33, okay? He was born a man, and eventually as time went by, he was very scholarly. He knew the Torah and a lot of the other biblical works in his period in time, and he knew the Jewish system of thoughts and everything like that, and of course he compounded them all at a very young age. And then in turn, of course, he more or less renounced, you could say in a manner of speaking, of being a man, because he felt his direct connection with God, and he became God realized, which means that the separation between himself and God, as far as an actualized being, there was no separation whatsoever. So it was like he merged with the consciousness of God, and from the consciousness of God, then in turn he began to teach people how to understand God. Okay, so
you're not in that merged state. You're in a different state, or are you in that merged state?
I merge to that state occasionally, but I have yet to obtain it completely 24/7. Okay. In other words, there are times that I'll go for 3, 4, 5, maybe a dozen hours in that state of being, but it is only infrequent. It is not on a daily basis by any means.
And I think that's what keeps you human, is stepping in and out of it, but not embracing it fully.
You're absolutely correct. That's what grounds me out. In other words, I think it is the grounding with the earth that basically balances me out and brings me back from being a pure spiritual entity more so into a physical body and having physical responsibilities and physical feelings and physical insights and mental insights and all this kind of thing. And then, of course,
what is your purpose of coming here? Have you uncovered?
Okay. At the age of 14, I was told by God, or God's representative, you could say, that eventually someday I would put together a 10,000-piece puzzle, all right? And that I would not know exactly when I collected the pieces, but I would have the insights of what the pieces gain in regards to the making of this puzzle. All right? About, probably a dozen years ago now, all right? So around the age of 53, I finally deciphered and determined that, in fact, I had completed this puzzle in its entirety. And, of course, God had promised that once the puzzle was put together, I would have a far better, a deeper, and wider understanding of creation itself than most people would ever have an avenue to. Now, is that true? In some circumstances, definitely so. In others, maybe not so much. Because you have to understand that we rely on verbal communication for the most part to communicate between each other. I know for a fact that intuitive or telepathic communication is a whole lot easier, and it's a whole lot more direct. Because in telepathic communication, you're also sending forth your emotions as well as your spirit intelligence in addition to the telepathy itself. So those that are telepathic on that wavelength communicate what you would call spirit to spirit rather than just human to human. So, but you take it back a couple notches and you say, okay, well, you know, you've got intuitives and you've got telepaths, and telepaths can get feelings and see things and so forth in the future. Intuitives, of course, can know things and see things in addition to the future. Their immediate future, sometimes the future a few weeks from now, sometimes the future far down is maybe 5 or 10 years from now. And they tend to channel also. You have mediums who can channel spirit, which basically they have opened themselves up to become receptors to the spirit world. And they have gatekeepers, which is basically and usually an angelic presence that basically keeps out anything that is negative, because you don't want to open up yourself to be that vulnerable and then in turn become possessed by something that's dark-natured. So you have a gatekeeper to keep out the negativity and only allow the spirits that are here to help or give knowledge to others in. And, of course, that would also include the relatives, the departed relatives of someone that is coming to see you. You know, they may be asking, well, you know, I never got to say goodbye. Are they okay? And they're asking all these kind of questions. And those are the questions most commonly answered by mediums. And then you have channels, and channels kind of fall somewhere in the middle, because channels can be divinely inspired and write works they don't even know they're writing, like the poetry that I did when I was 12, for example. And then other times they just do automatic writing without even thinking about it. Sometimes they'll sit and they go sort of like into an altered state of mind or an altered state of being, and they just begin to speak, and they're no longer themselves. Instead, this other entity is coming in and speaking through them, and that's what a true channel is. So, yes, I have channeled at times. I automatic write at times. It's been a while since I've done either one of those. Of course, I also read the tarot. I've been reading.
When you channel, do you remember everything that's said, or do you set aside your consciousness and let the other person come in and take over? Which style
I would
do
say
you do
maybe 70-30. In other words, 70% the being or the entity, for example, one of the saints or one of the ascended masters, okay? For example, Saint Germain. If Saint Germain decided he wanted to pass a message along to a given person through me, then of course it would be 70% Saint Germain, and I would have a 30% residual memory. Do I go completely blank? No, I don't go completely blank. And that's mainly the difference between a medium and a channel. You see, a medium basically is giving over the majority of their senses to the being that is coming in to share. And as a result, while they're in a trance-like state, they don't have a memory from what is transpiring. So when they come back into being the regular conscious self, they basically have little to no memory at all.
Yeah, I don't do that. I stay there. I'm too ornery. I ain't going anywhere. I'm too curious and I'm too ornery. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay and see what you're doing. I want to make sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, like I said, it's a. To me, I see it as being kind of like a symbiotic relationship. Okay, In other
Yeah.
words, you're coming into me, who is a host, physically. Of course, I have a body to maintain, and so that's primary.
Right.
And I'm going to maintain this regardless of whether you come through or not, okay? I do, of course, want to solidly identify exactly who you are, and I will put you through tests to make certain who you are. Energetic tests, spiritual tests, and tests of love and divine, kind of sort of through a divine magnifying glass, you could say. Okay? Because entities, especially dark entities, can appear to be light, and light can appear to be dark. They have the ability to switch either role simply because you cannot be with one without the other. It's just a matter that those who are primarily dark have forgotten that they're light, but they still contain a spark of lightness in them. And those that, of course, are light have only a spark of darkness within them, okay? But, I mean, there is no one completely light and there is no one completely dark, okay? Even Christ was dark from the aspect of saying that at least he was a human being, okay? And no human being can be absolutely divinely perfect, because if we become divinely perfect, we will cease to exist. The energy that our spirit will manifest, this body will no longer be able to contain, and as a result, it will either explode or disintegrate, one of the two. The vibration and frequency of a divine being coming into a physical personage would not. It's just not going to happen.
So what have you learned about the source of all this, the creator of all, the celestial healer?
Well, I have learned that there is...
What is the configuration of this?
Okay, I see things this way, and of course it's strictly my humble opinion, and the way that I've been shown things over time. I believe that, in fact, there is one source of all that is nothing but pure consciousness and pure energy. They have no facsimile of a body. They have no emotions. They have no cares. They have no concerns. They are basically a stream of love so unconditional that I cannot even voice it perfectly in human speech. All right? This is the sustaining source of all of creation. Now, you come forward from that, or you could say that they had a son and a daughter, per se, and this is Mother and Father God, okay? And herein you have a male God and a female God, and the male God has a tremendous amount of power, and he does not wield it very kindly. So as a result, he gives his power over to the Mother God, basically, who is tempered by mercy and compassion and so on and so forth. So God's energy creates and regulates and manifests and sustains all that is in creation, throughout creation, without exception. And Mother God does the same thing. So there is a power that is balanced between a male and female energy in regards to gender-specific races, okay? Now, of course, if you pull it back and you're no longer gender-specific, then you're talking about beings that are androgynous, such as the angels and other divine beings. They are androgynous from the aspect being that they're not concerned the mundane aspects of physical sex and so on and so forth. That's way so low below them that they don't even give it a second thought. So then below them, you would,
or like the yin yang. Did they ever reach a point? Does Mother, Father, God ever become one, like the yin yang symbol, where they're like in one?
Yeah, basically, yeah, you could say that, because they are a balance, a complete and total balance to each other. And this is the force of manifestation, you could say. Okay, in other words, the ultimate source of all is a creative being of pure conscious energy, and it is basically it reached out and said, okay, in order for me to create creativity in all of its wildest forms, in all of these various universes and all these various dimensions and all these various beings of all kinds in all these different dimensions and all these different universes and all these different star systems and everything else, I need to have a balanced force that would neither be weighted to one side more so than the other side. And yet at the same time, in order to have sustainable races, you must have some kind of propagation amongst themselves, or else the race eventually would die out. That is, if they are corporeal. Now, if they're not corporeal, that's a whole other story, okay? So anyway, you could say that this god and goddess of all begat children, okay? Now, these children basically are the gods and goddesses and deities that are scattered around in myths all over the world, all right? Now, I'm not saying that they do exist. I am not going to go as far as to say they don't exist, but you have to understand that there have been many cultures, many civilizations that have trended upon forming a cultural tradition in respect to specific deities, and these all had a very real reason at the time they were venerated, you see? So, if you break it all back down, of course, there's only one Mother and Father God, and beyond them, there's only one source of creation. But if you bring it back out, then, of course, you have all kinds of deities running around that would be the direct children of Mother and Father God, and they would, in fact, be gods and goddesses themselves. Okay? But they were created in a specific dimension, in a specific planet, or what have you, for a very specific purpose. Okay? To either teach or to be adorned and worshipped and so on and so forth, because that was a fulfillment of a need for a particular species. So then, of course, from there you break it down. Now, of course, you know, the most familiar that I am, of course, is that within the boundaries and the hierarchy of Earth. Okay, so yeah, part of it's Christian, part of it's Buddhist, part of it's Zen, part of it's Taoist. I mean, I'm a theologian, so I've studied this stuff for 40 years.
And part of your I understand. Christian upbringing do you think influenced you to this day? Because you were in a Catholic
boarding school, yes. But you have to also understand,
now, were you subjected to going to church and all the?
I had First Holy Communion, and I got dressed in the little white suit and given the white Bible and the whole 9 yards and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, I was being pulled away from the church and taught family tradition of Druidism. Okay? And Druidism
that was
basically
by your grandmother.
That was by my great-grandmother. Yes, my great-grandmother. Not my grandmother, my great-grandmother. Yeah, because my grandmother was Roman Catholic. Okay? And that's how I ended up in the Catholic school.
Was it the same side of the family? Was that great-grandmother your grandmother's mother?
That was my mother's mother.
So how did she become a Druid and then her daughter was Catholic? What happened there? You know?
Well, it's a rite of passage. Okay, it comes down to every third generation. Okay, and originally it was every seventh generation male, and eventually the males got scattered and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. So they started relying more on the female side of the tradition, and so it became every third female. Well, of course, you know. My great-grandmother would have passed it on to my grandmother, but of course she was Roman Catholic, so that wasn't going to go. All right? So then in turn, she was going to pass it on to her daughter, and of course that wasn't going to go because she was Christian in belief, and she was at times a bit out there mentally, a bit out there emotionally. She had been institutionalized at one point, you know, because she had a complete mental breakdown that lasted about 2.5 years. All right, during which time, and this is going way back in time now. We're talking probably in the early in the mid 50s. All right, so I would have been I would have been 9 months old when this happened. So we were reunited when I was age 3. I was put into foster care for approximately 2.5 years. And then in turn, of course, I had gotten older and big enough that she could no longer take me to work with her, and that's when I became confined to the Catholic Church. Because she was a switchboard operator, and so basically as a toddler, at the age of 4, I had gotten tall enough that I was starting to pull the plugs out of the switchboard and disconnect people's phone calls and all that. And she, if that had gone on for long, she would have lost her job. So they decided that they would put me in a Catholic boarding school, and that was the best thing to do. Now, the interaction between myself and my great-grandmother was completely under wraps. No one else in the family even knew this was going on.
Oh, cool.
Okay, because naturally anyone else if anyone else had known it was going on, I'm sure they all would have come forward and had all kinds of objections to it, for sure.
Now, when you were getting all this information from the Catholic school and from your great-grandmother who was buried, what did you tend to believe? What did you think was true? What part resonated with your soul?
The Druids.
Mm-hmm.
Because I saw the church as nothing more than a vehicle to reach out and control people, whether they wanted to be controlled or not. A means by which, the Holy Roman Empire could control civilization and mankind through the Pope, and also the various Christian denominations that have spread forth since then. And as far as my Christian side is concerned, I'm definitely Coptic. In other words, I am Eastern Orthodox Egyptian. And that's the church. Right. If I am to be confined to a church, I am a bishop of that church, and it is that church I cling to. Not that I'm into organized religion anymore, mind you.
But what brand of Catholic were the two schools? You went to two different orphanages type things.
The main difference between the
were they Roman
two schools.
Catholic, Greek Catholic? Yeah.
Okay, well, you have the Western Church, which is the Roman Catholics and the Catholics in general, and then all that part of their civilization. And then you have the Eastern Orthodox, which is the Eastern Church, okay? And they met at a synod once, and the two of them could not agree. Then the main debate between the two of them was the fact that how many books would be included in the Bible. Because, you see, the Western Church had conformed and basically gone upon Rome's leadership and said, okay, well, we're only going to include these books. And the Eastern Church came back and said, no, you need to include this other half a dozen books because it portrays more of the life of Christ that is not told in the mere books that you're including. And it also includes a lot of different prophets and so forth that, again, you're not including. And if persons are attempting to understand God and the Word of God or what God has to say to them, then it is best that you include more information than you are. And so that became the rift between the Eastern Orthodox and the Western Church. And to this day, you could say there are some compromises here and there, but they will probably never, ever see eye to eye.
Right. And then what's the difference?
For example,
how are they different? How is Coptic different than Eastern or Roman?
Okay. The Roman Church is in Rome. Okay, it's Catholic. The Eastern Church consists of 6 Eastern Orthodox branches. All right, you have Russian Orthodox, you have Ethiopian Orthodox, you have Greek Orthodox, you have Coptic Orthodox, and you have there's one other, and I usually forget it. I believe it's Lithuanian, maybe, because there is a Church of Africa, and they're all Eastern Orthodox. The only thing that varies in their tradition is the culture and civilization or the country that they grew up in. Okay? So in other words, when you say Coptic Orthodox, you're talking Egypt. When you say Greek Orthodox, you're talking Greece. When you talking Ethiopian, you're talking Ethiopia. Russian Orthodox, of course, is in Russia. And the Lithuanians would be in Lithuania. Now, of course, the harvest ground amongst all of these various churches and so forth became the United States. And now, of course, there is an Eastern Orthodox assemblage or synod or diocese, basically, of each of the Eastern churches on this soil, as well as the Catholics and as well as all the other Christian branches. So, yes, we are a religious melting pot as well as a people melting pot. And of course, I helped found.
And they all go back to the story of Jesus. Do they diverge? Do they embrace the story of Jesus, or do they go to different? Like the Jews went in different directions, right? Around,
well, of course,
they think they're still waiting for Jesus to come.
Right.
He hasn't
exactly.
the first coming, and then so they all have a belief in Jesus, the ones you just mentioned.
Well, they all recognize that Jesus was a prophet or an ascended master. I'll put it that way. It is only truly the Catholic Church that decrees that Jesus is a savior of mankind. And all the spin-offs from the Catholic Church, which decree that Jesus came here to save mankind. The Eastern Church kind of, they recognize him as a divine Son of God that was a man incarnate before he became divine, and that they recognize his humanity more so than the Catholic Church wants to recognize. That's the significant difference. All right, let's get out of this.
Okay, next subject. You pick where you want to go. We've got 38 minutes left. Go for it.
Okay. So, all right, you're asking me for my point of origin. All right. Now, I have been read a great many times by various tarot readers, palmists, psychics, mediums, gypsies, and then, of course, from all of this feedback, I then in turn have turned inward probably millions of times in seeking the same answer. And, of course, at 14, when I was shown my actual physical identity was nothing more than a ball of light that had consciousness, that kind of answered a great many questions other than, naturally, I cannot be. My origin is not physical, okay? My origin is that of a conscious ball of light that obviously, dwells within another realm, okay? And at the same time, I do control a physical body, so you could say this physical body is my puppet and not the other way around. In other words, I'm not a human being chasing after enlightenment or chasing after a spiritual experience. Rather, I am a spiritual being enjoying or at least experiencing human incarnation from the standpoint that I have the understanding of who I am as a spirit being, more so than who I pay heed to a large extent as a human being. Because naturally, as human beings, we make thousands and thousands of compromises on a daily basis.
Right.
Whereas my spiritual self would just prefer to lay out on the sand and in front of the beach and not do much of nothing all day long. Because I feel the beach is so calming, okay? Now that would imply that I am from a water planet or maybe of some origin of that nature. So then I kept inquiring because I have an insatiable curiosity. The more questions I ask and the more answers I am given, the more I parlay the answers into further questions. So at this point in time, as far as my actual identity is concerned, I am referred to as an ancient one, okay? Which means that I date back to whenever creation occurred as a spiritual being, okay? Now, in addition to that, I have also been told that I'm what you call a celestial healer. In other words, this is a being that I guess you could say is sent out in universes to put out fires, and where there are numerous planets that need healing, I come forth and I heal the entire universe at the same time. Now, I don't understand how this is done, okay? I cannot give you all of the details or the as-tos or how-tos or whys or anything else. This is only a glimmering of insight that I have as to the origin of my spirit, okay? Yes, I've had hundreds and probably thousands of lives here, and yes, I can recall most of them. Not all of them probably, but most of them. And all that knowledge and wisdom is archived in my consciousness. And that consciousness is spirit in
So what are
origin.
Some of the more relevant lives you've had? You came here, and so what is it you intend to do for humanity? What is the purpose of all these lives that you come here? Was it in service to humanity, or was it because you needed to learn things, or a combination? Yeah, what was that about?
As a celestial healer, I believe I was brought here to help mankind at the end of the fourth Kali Yuga, which is the end of 100,000 years. Okay, so mankind has gotten to where they are right now every 100,000 years, and they've done it 3 times in the past. And rather than ascending as an entire race, you could say, in a manner of speaking, they failed. But I don't like to use the word failed because, from a humongously general terminology, you could say that everyone is always in the right place at the right time. So the reason being that we all have free will, okay? And that's a divine right that's given to us by the source of all, okay? That's something that cannot be interfered with and will not be interfered with, regardless of who has decided that they're going to come to the planet. Even if the entirety or the majority of the race were to suddenly become enslaved, there would still be pockets of rebels all over the place. Okay? In other words, you cannot completely, you cannot control that which is only controlled by spirit. Because the will of the spirit is so divine that it will not be overthrown, regardless of the influence or regardless of the attempt made by other beings from whatever dimension they happen to come from. So, that said, as a celestial healer, instead of healing a universe, I was given the mission of basically coming to Earth and assisting other persons to a large degree on how to ascend or to basically become the highest possible version of themselves. How to learn who they are in truth, what they are in truth, and so forth, and bring that forward through them and in them if they so chose to make this choice to do so. Again, you see, even as a celestial being, I cannot override your free will.
So what's going on at this time? It seems like everything is, I mean, it's always been kind of crazy, right? Think of Genghis Khan and Hitler and World War II, yada, yada. But
oh, yeah, of course.
It seems like another whole level of craziness right now. What is going on in the grand design of things? Are we? It's almost like this could be an extinction event, either for the human race or for us, and a bunch of species are going to go with us.
Okay.
Or yeah,
you're going to have to break this down and segment it out a great deal. Why? Because you see, anytime you start combining 3 minds or more, you're talking about a tremendous amount of creative energy and a tremendous amount of creative, endless possibility. Right? So if you have 1 million or 1 billion people all believing that we're at the end of times and we are going to experience the Armageddon or experience apocalypse, then I assure you, chances are those 1 million or 1 billion people are going to experience just exactly that. Because you see, what people don't realize, what you think, what you feel, and what you express brings about your reality. So, if you're in a negative state of mind, all of a sudden you have all kinds of negative events collide with you or impose themselves upon your reality. It's because the origin that created those negative events is you. And if you have a positive outlook and a positive frame of mind, where basically, you got all this different, you are attempting to create happiness and joy and love and bliss for other people, and that's the frame of mind you go at life from, then in turn, those are the kind of events that are going to enter into your life, because that's the kind of energy and intent that you're sending out to the universe, and the universe obliges you by saying, okay, we got a positive one over here, boom, positive events to them. We got a negative one over here, boom, negative events to them. So you back it off and you talk about an overall consciousness, and again, even the overall consciousness is drastically segmented into many parts. Simply because no 2 given individuals think alike. Okay? We may have a lot of thoughts, ideologies, perspectives, and ideas in common, but we still do not completely think alike. Just as you're asking me, what is my perception of creation and the hierarchy of creation itself, and what is the ultimate God source, and so on and so forth. there are going to be billions that will come forward and disagree with me and tell me that I'm wrong because they have a different perception than I do. But they have not experienced the same kinds of lives that I've had, nor have they been to necessarily the origins of themselves. You see, that's something that is acquired and achieved. It is not something that is just given out. You could say, in a manner of speaking, it is earned, because when initially you come down here, you have the perspective that you're purely human and you're here to learn lessons, or you're here to have experiences, and so on and so forth. And the spirituality of your nature is put on the back burner. So the more you live, the more your spirituality comes forward, until basically your spirituality is completely overriding your physicality as far as your mental, emotional perspectives are concerned. As they say, with age comes wisdom.
Great. So it's nice to be wise. Are we wise yet, Richard? We're kind of wise. Kind of wise, huh? Yeah. Okay, so you came here and you have what you intend to do for humanity, and you're here to help humanity ascend, become their true selves. What does that mean? How can they become their truest selves?
All right. First and foremost, all answers are within. No answers lie without, simply because the world around you is created by you. So therefore, since you're the originating force of what transpires around you, in order to get to know yourself, you have to turn inward. Okay? This message has been told to mankind for hundreds of thousands of years through all kinds of speakers, through all kinds of enlightened beings, through all kinds of saints, all kinds of different people, all through down through numerous civilizations, serious different cultures, and all this kind of thing. Okay? And the message is always the same, and that is to turn inward. Okay? Now, by turning inward, it means that you turn the outer world off. Okay? That means that you no longer rely on your mental self for your perceptions and for your how you perceive things and how you understand things. Rather, you turn to your spiritual nature and your spiritual self in order to get to know who you truly are. So you could say you turn away from the world, at least for an hour or two, all right? And during that period of time, you could listen to music. You can listen to meditation tapes. You can listen to sounds of the ocean. You can listen to sounds of the rainforest. You can listen to anything that brings you comfort and calm. Because the more comfort and calm you have, the more likely you're not going to hear all this conflict that's going on in your mind, and you're not going to have to deal with anything that is emotionally conflicting on the outside, okay? So you're kind of drawing into your own heart and drawing into your own spirit. And what you find reflected there would be considered to be more genuine as the identity of yourself than what has been projected onto you to believe what is you. So in the stillness, you learn your heart. You learn your connectedness to God source or God and Goddess source. I mean, I don't want to, I by no means put either male or female above the other. That's just not right. They are completely balanced in power, perception, ability, the whole 9 yards. So when I address God and Goddess, that's how I address it. It's God and Goddess as equal. Because when it comes to our physicality, of course, we are completely created male and female in one body. But of course, there are absolute opposite genders as far as our physicality is concerned. But emotionally, hormonally, genetically, and the rest of it, yes, there is a balance of the two in one body as it is conceived at birth. And of course, then the gender denotes what term of identification the world at large is going to give. So anyway, I mean, there's all kinds of inner traditions. There's all kinds of there's probably at least a good 100,000 paths, if not more, that you can seek inner knowledge. Okay, there's all kinds of traditions. There's all kinds of schools. I mean, for example, you can study the Kabbalah, which is a Jewish mysticism. You can study the Tarot, which in turn itself is a message system derived originally in Egypt because it was called the Book of Life when it was originally created. And why was it called the Book of Life? Because each card was supposed to depict certain stages in a person's life that a person might come upon, and then in turn these various cards or tablets would show how they interrelated to each other and in what form they were going to be coming at the person by that way. Okay? Then, of course, there's meditation, there's magic, there is sacred science, there is sacred geometry, there is anything. I mean, the field of metaphysics now comprises probably over at least 1,000, if not more, different schools, traditions, and topics that one can get into and devote themselves to. And I would go as far as to say none of them is either more right or more wrong than the other, because in actuality, they all lead to the same place. And the same can be said about religion. There is no one religion that is any more better or worse than another, because again, they are all paths leading to the same place. And that's back to Mother, Father, God, and the Creator of all.
So even if you get involved in a religion that seems maybe cultish or that's not going to really teach you truth or higher awareness, you can still find enlightenment by dealing with this whole situation. Is that what you're saying, that all roads lead to Rome, all paths lead to God, and even though it might seem, less than perfect, there's divine perfection in everything? So, for example, my mother got involved with a cult when she was, in her 40s or something, maybe her 50s. I'd say 40s. I was a teenager. And, but, she started going down this really weird path, but then she snapped out of it, because I basically said,
right.
Mom, you've got me. You have to finish raising me.
Right.
And she got conscious from it. Even though it was pretty horrendous. This guy was getting all the wives in the neighborhood to sell their houses, give all the money to them.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So, in other words,
so
the cult was based on a Messiah kind of complex, right?
Yes. So,
okay.
When you were saying, like, all religions, so, what are you saying? Some religions are cults. So what benefit can you get out of belonging to a cult?
Well, again, you see, the benefit is not so much as being involved in the cult, rather the benefit is derived when you leave it. Because you suddenly realize once you've stepped away from it how much you were being controlled, how much you were being dominated, how much you were being told what your reality would and wouldn't be. So you get from that a sense of internal motivation. In other words, you take back your power and you say, no, I'm not serving you. I'm not going to be your number 59 wife or whatever it happens to be. I'm going to be me, and you can no longer control me in any way. And see, these are what you would call aha moments, or moments that you have sudden realizations. You can get them when you're reading a book. You can get them in conversations. You can get them in just looking outside and observing nature. You can get it through animal interaction. You can get it through UFOs. You can get it through ETs. You can get it through all kinds of different experiences depending on how open you are to that given experience, okay? Now, I mean, you've got demonologists that run around the world collecting demons or fighting demons and all this other kind of thing. And you would say to me, well, what benefit is that? Well, naturally, if they're busy fighting them, then the demons are too preoccupied to sit here and try and possess human beings, okay? But like I said, again, you see, in all lightness there is darkness, and in all darkness there is light. One cannot renege from the other, because in order to do so, they would be attempting to cut themselves off from the very source of existence that created them in the first place. Because on this plane of existence, you have duality. There is right and wrong. There is black and white. There is, good and bad. There's harmony and disharmony. There's, all the opposites. Okay, because that's what dual nature means. So we have male and female. We have right and wrong. We have lawful and unlawful. We have crimes and, obeying the law and all this kind of thing. And these are all compromises that we make in regards to making a statement outwardly of saying who we are and what we are about, okay? So if you turn inwardly, all right, you get to know yourself through personal observation. In other words, you review all that has traumatized you in the past, and you release all the traumatization through forgiveness. But not so much through forgiving the parties that may have traumatized you. Rather, you begin with forgiving yourself for allowing yourself to allow them to traumatize you. In other words, the first stage of getting to know yourself is taking back full responsibility on your own shoulders for everything that has ever happened to you in life. And that's a big mouthful to say. But when you think about it, it is very, very true. It is very, very true.
I've
now
had,
that's
I've
not
had
to say.
Clients, Go ahead. Finish your thought.
That's not to say that there aren't random accidents and things of that nature. Because I don't believe that two drivers, definitely deliberately drive down a road to hit a head-on collision with each other. No, I think that's a little bit preposterous. But there are people. Unfortunately, robbers go out to rob, and sooner or later they're going to come upon an unsuspecting victim, and that's the one they're going to rob. Well, if the person that was an unsuspecting victim had never become an unsuspecting victim at all, they would never have gotten robbed. But if the robber who wanted to rob, again, had never become a robber, the robbery would never take place. And even the same can be said of murder to certain degrees. You have that. We live in kind of a kaleidoscope collage of things in regards to the occurrences in life, because there's all kinds of energies that we're constantly being bombarded with, the majority of which are spiritual in nature, but by the time they filter down into our physical consciousness, they are somewhat blurry and somewhat transmuted. In other words, they oftentimes lose some of their spiritual origination, unless, of course, we happen to be in the dream state, or, of course, if we happen to be traveling outside of our bodies and say we go to the astral plane or we go to another dimension and we travel every night and we go all over the place, and we're not just limited to this reality or this dimension or this universe. We have no limitations, because, you see, we are immortal divine beings, okay? And the waking up process is learning exactly what and who you are as an immortal divine being, where you fall into the makeup of things, or at least have a general idea. You don't have to have the absolute, complete, certain knowledge of exactly who you are, because then in turn you're attempting to define and control yourself. You see what I'm saying? As long as you can give someone else listening, or someone that you're talking to, or whatever, the impression of where you're coming from, that is what is vital. The exact day, point, and origin that you were created and all the rest of it is really of little significance, simply because in reality we all belong to one source of creation, period, regardless of whether we're in this dimension or in the next 28 dimensions, or in this universe or the next 59,000 universes. That's irrelevant. The fact remains that there is only one sustaining force and source of all of creation, period. And that one source of creation has no conscious intent necessarily of creating, other than through Mother and Father God, which is a balanced perception of that same being reaching out to the universe and saying, okay, we unconditionally love you, and we are going to create this masterpiece over here. And this masterpiece is going to have 59 billion stars and 18,000 universes, and we're just going to sling it out there and see what happens. Because in a manner of speaking, you could say that God is seeing through your eyes, hearing through your heart, feeling through your emotions, and even at times experiencing your physicality to a very, very minute degree. So we are, in a manner of speaking, the eyes and ears of God, because, yes, we are the children. Spiritually, we are the children of our Creator. and we are members of the Creatrix. We are all members of one spiritual consciousness. Now, what role we play in that consciousness is determined by our spiritual decisiveness as to what role it is we want to play. And we are not bound to one reality or one earth or one cosmos or one universe or one perception of reality or one dimension or anything else. Why? Because, again, it falls back to who we are as when we were created. We were created to be divine, multidimensional beings of light and love. Why? Because energy can only be perceived in light. You can't perceive energy in darkness. Look at a black hole, for example. A black hole is tremendously a humongous amount of energy that is sucking other things into it, but you cannot perceive how it's doing it because it's so dark.
And so, well, when I was trying to say earlier, is like I've had a lot of clients that had what's called dark, quote unquote, experiences. Like I had two clients, different people that were married in the Mooney cult. So you just show up and they say, this is who you're marrying. And they do a big wedding and everybody gets married at the same time. And then you have to try to live with this person that's now your spouse. I had a couple clients, that one in particular stands out where she was in these satanic rituals, satanic rituals, and so on. All the some that were, there was one guy that was raised in a very strict, like Hasidic Jewish culture, and wasn't allowed to do anything, right? So, but everybody, when I followed back, except for the one person who caught cancer and died, everybody came out the other side. And even though these experiences were absolutely horrendous, they realized that they attributed to who they were and the growth they needed to have in order to become the person they were meant to be.
True.
Yeah. So we have just another 10 minutes. What's the most significant thing you want our listeners to know about this journey you've had? What you've learned about yourself and what you want to pass on to humanity?
Well, I would have to say that, all answers lie within us. In other words, if you turn inwardly to your spiritual consciousness, all answers can be, all questions can be answered there and then. And this knowledge is at your fingertips. All you have to do is ask for it. The only thing that limits you in life is you. The only thing that sets up obstacles before you in life is you. You have a sea of endless possibilities.
Cover that.
Do what?
They need to go. What's the best way for someone to go inward and find their answers for themselves?
Allow the mind, which is constant thought, to become tranquil and still. So that in turn, basically, instead of being barraged by all your thoughts and all the dialogues and all the conversations and all the questions, or all the mind chatter, as we like to call it, you become the observer of everything that you're involved with, and yet at the same time, you're not influenced by any of the events. Once you have reached the state of the observer, then in turn, of course, you realize from a grander perspective exactly how much of a game this really is and how much of an illusion it really is. But in order to reach a state of quietude, it's very, very easy. All you got to do is take your focus off of your thoughts and put them onto something else. For example, a candle flame, okay? Or a roving river, or a forest, or the ocean. Sit by the ocean and listen to the surf. And eventually what will happen is you will emotionally become in tune with the surf of the ocean, and you will no longer be focused on the thoughts in your mind. And then, of course, you turn inward, and once you turn inward, all you have to do is ask yourself a question. Well, tell me about such and such, or, that kind of thing. And because there is no chatter in your mind is totally still and receptive, and therefore you can hear the answers that are coming from your spiritual self rather than from your mind and even at times your heart, because you have to step to a degree beyond your emotional self as well, because your emotional self may be clinging to you from elation, or it may be clinging to you from trauma. And again, you have to be able to get past the trauma. You have to see the past as the past, okay? The past can neither be changed nor can it be undone. But it does have a bunch of lessons that were instilled within you at the time that such events occurred. So you get to the point where you're like at a movie screen. You're watching a movie in front of you, only you're the actor, and these other people are acting in this particular play that may have been something that harmed you, and basically you're no longer affected by it emotionally. So it doesn't matter whether the screen begins playing the movie or you get up and walk out on the movie. It no longer has any effect on you, period. Because the past is the past. Like I said, you can't change it or undo it, okay? Now, the present, of course, has been built upon what has occurred before, all right? And I'm not going to say purely on the past, because you could have the future that occurred in the past at different segments in your experience, or you could have divine intervention that occurred in various segments of your past, just as much as you could have trauma, okay? So you want to embrace all that is good and hang on to all that is good and allow all that was bad to allow to pass away and no longer have an influence on you. Once you do this, then of course you're creating this big, huge void, because all of that memory has now been compressed into kind of like a zip file, if you want to talk computer terms, and it's been all zip filed behind you, and it no longer affects you whatsoever. So now you have this humongous memory void, okay? And it's like having an empty cup, okay? So when you have an empty cup, you decide what it is you want to fill the cup with and how much you want to fill it with. And so then you start asking yourself questions from a spiritual perspective, okay? Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? What is it I am to do? Well, you see, any kind of questions that ask for an answer outside of yourself, you're never going to get answered. The reason being, you're the only one that can answer them. So, who am I? Well, I'm just like the rest of the world, okay? I came from a creative source that is beyond our human understanding and beyond, to a large extent, even our human description, okay? So in order to ascertain an idea of what that consciousness would be like, I form it into a mother and a father God that are equal in all perspectives, and they in turn were given the direct responsibility of creating all that is. Even though they don't have the force and the source of initiatory power to do so, that power was breathed into them, you could say, so that in turn they could express it outwardly. So, all of creation is one humongous happy family. Now, how many are convinced of this, God only knows. You probably don't make that recognition until you probably get up to at least the 10th or 12th dimension, okay? Because dimensions are like frequencies and variables of this nature. Vibrations, frequencies, sounds, these are all energies in motion, okay? So the higher the dimension, the closer you could say that one becomes ultimately God. So you could say Godhead is God only knows. I don't know how many dimensions away God is removed from us, from our physical aspect, but I would imagine it's probably a few billion, okay? So if in turn you become God conscious to that extent, then in turn you could say, in a manner of speaking, you would cease to be, but at the same time you would always be a part of that creative source. So you can never cease to be, because you're always a part thereof.
You're always a part.
And you were created as an independent part, okay? And then, of course, you fall forward, and you've got all these different dimensions, and you've got all these different cosmoses, and you've got all these different universes and galaxies and all the rest of it, and all of these different beings from all of these different planets and all of these different universes and so forth. Because, no, mankind is by no means alone. Probably, who knows? I wouldn't even hesitate to guess how many billions of life forms there are, even in the immediate, say, half a dozen universes, okay? And, of course, a lot of them are a heck of a lot more advanced technologically than we are. And as a result, they come down and they visit us because it's like they're visiting a zoo, you could almost say. Because they have no memory of ever being so undeveloped as us. So, I mean, you know, let's go visit the zoo today, you know, and see what's going on at the zoo, in a manner of speaking.
Well, it is
of course,
like
I'm
a grand experiment. I just want to make you aware that we are down to the last 4 minutes, so we need to start wrapping up our discussion. So what's the most important thing to convey? Yes.
Well, I'm here to help people I'm here to help people heal themselves. Okay? You cannot heal someone unless they're willing to heal themselves. And that healing could transpire emotionally. It could be transpired mentally, psychically, spiritually, whatever. Okay? And in that healing process, they will in turn become more and more their true selves because you're getting rid of all the baggage that they're carrying around with them that they don't need. All right? Then in turn, I'm here to proffer a message. All right? And I've written a couple books that I hope to have come out in publication probably no later than the end of the summer. All right? And one of them is The Seeker, which is a novel which is close to 500 pages long, and it's something along the theme of fantasy because you're talking like Doctor Strange and the Green Lantern combined, okay? And that's the kind of life I've had because I've always seen, known, and heard spirits all of my life. I have never, ever been alone in any given situation regardless, okay? There are always spirits around you, and you have angels, you have guides, you have helpers, you have ascended masters, you have a healing team, you have thousands of beings that love you unconditionally. Okay, so you're never alone. It only appears that way in a physicality because that's the way it appears. Right? Is it that way in reality? No, by no means. I also have a poetry anthology I'm coming out with, and then who knows? I don't know. Maybe a radio show on a constant basis, perhaps a movie series, or perhaps a television series down the road. That again, I don't know. But I am a very creative person, you know. And this is how I like to express myself.
On an adventure.
Yes, an adventure.
All those things are
during that. Yes, during that adventure, of course, you know, I want to help people as much as I can in any given situation that I'm capable of helping. So that's the bottom line.
Thank you so much for coming on our show again. It's been a delight. That was very quick. That was 90 minutes. And we'll have you back again. I'm taking a break until March because I'm celebrating my birthday month. But thank you, Richard. We're going to go to the closing music, and we'll have this up for everybody to listen to on the YouTube in about half an hour or so. So much love and blessings, Richard. There's everybody that came to listen. You take care and stay out of harm's way, and we'll see you again next week. Love
Sounds great.
And aloha. Bye-bye.
Aloha. Ciao for now.
Ciao.